This story contains themes of mystery and suspense that some listeners may find unsettling. The dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight cutting through the gloom of Grandma Eleanor's attic, each tiny particle a silent witness to decades of forgotten lives. Amelia Vance coughed, waving a hand in front of her face, the air thick with the scent of mothballs and aged paper. She'd been at this for 3 days, sifting through the remains of a life she'd only ever known from a distance. A life packed into boxes labeled with elegant, looping script that was unmistakably her grandmother's. Christmas decorations, one read. Old letters burn, another, which Amelia had decided to ignore for now. It was in a dusty, unmarked trunk, tucked beneath a pile of yellowed lace doilies and a heavy velvet cloak that smelled faintly of lavender and something metallic, that she found it. A camera. Not just any camera, but an old Polaroid, the kind her grandmother, a staunch advocate for digital photography, would never have owned. It was a bulky rectangular thing, its plastic shell a deep faded olive green, with a worn leather strap. It felt heavy in her hands, colder than the surrounding air, almost as if it had been stored in a different climate entirely. There was a strange symbol etched into the side, a tiny, almost imperceptible spiral that seemed to pull her gaze, making her feel a flicker of unease she quickly dismissed as fatigue. Amelia was a creature of habit, a graphic designer who lived by schedules and digital precision. This analog relic felt like an alien artifact. Yet, an inexplicable curiosity, a whisper of a forgotten memory, tugged at her. Why would Eleanor have kept this? Her grandmother had been practical, almost to a fault. Sentimental keepsakes were usually photos, not the instruments that took them. With a grunt, Amelia pulled the trunk further into the sliver of light. Inside, nestled beside the camera, was a single unopened pack of Polaroid film. The expiration date on the box was smudged, but she could just make out April 1998. 25 years old. The chances of it working were practically zero, but the camera itself seemed to hum with a silent potential, a quiet challenge. She blew dust off the lens, a small circular eye staring back at her. The viewfinder was cloudy. She clicked open the film compartment, a dull thud echoing in the quiet attic. The old film pack slid in with a satisfying click. It was foolish, she knew. A waste of time, a waste of perfectly good curiosity. But the pull was too strong. Amelia pointed the camera at a stack of antique books piled haphazardly on a nearby stool. The spines were faded, titles unreadable. A perfectly mundane, harmless subject. She pressed the shutter button. There was a low mechanical whirring sound, surprisingly strong for such an old device, followed by a soft click. A blank white rectangle of photo paper slowly emerged from the slot at the front. Amelia pulled it free, a small gasp escaping her lips. It was exactly as she remembered Polaroids developing, a smooth, featureless white canvas. She held it carefully, remembering the childhood ritual of shaking the photo, impatient for the image to appear. She shook it gently now, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips, expecting nothing really, maybe a faint, blurry outline of the books, or perhaps just a black rectangle from the expired chemicals. But as the seconds ticked by, a faint grayness began to bleed into the white, slowly, hesitantly. It wasn't black. It was something else. The edges of the paper darkened first, then a murky shape began to coalesce in the center. Amelia stopped shaking, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't her stack of books. The image that slowly, agonizingly formed before her eyes was one of pure, unadulterated wrongness. It was the corner of the attic, yes, the same dusty stool, the same stack of books. But everything was distorted, warped. The books weren't just faded. Their spines seemed to writhe, the titles replaced by incomprehensible symbols that looked like ancient runes. The stool itself appeared to be melting into the floor, a dark, viscous liquid pooling around its legs. And behind it, where there should have been a wall covered in peeling wallpaper, there was a gaping, inky blackness, a void that seemed to swallow the light. But what truly made Amelia's stomach clench was the figure. Standing in the corner, half obscured by the encroaching darkness, was a silhouette. Tall, impossibly thin, with long, spindly limbs. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. Its head seemed to tilt, an unseen gaze fixed directly on the camera on her. There was no detail, just a profound, terrifying absence of light where its features should have been. It was a shadow that felt more real, more substantial, than the dust-filled air around her. Amelia's hand trembled, the photo almost slipping from her grasp. She stared from the developing image to the actual corner of the attic, her eyes darting back and forth. The stool was solid, the books were still, the wallpaper peeling but intact. There was no melting liquid, no gaping void, and absolutely positively no impossibly thin shadowy figure. The sunbeams still cut through the air, illuminating only dust. Her mind scrambled for an explanation. Expired film. Definitely expired film. Or perhaps the camera itself was broken, some internal mechanism distorting the image. It had to be. Her rational brain, the one that dealt with pixels and precise measurements, demanded a logical answer. This was just a bizarre malfunction. A trick of the light, perhaps interacting with ancient chemicals. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She even let out a short, nervous laugh, a sound that felt hollow and unconvincing even to herself. "Okay, old camera," she muttered, trying to sound casual. "You've got a twisted sense of humor." But the image in her hand felt cold, like the camera itself. It wasn't just distorted, it felt malevolent. The shadowy figure's unseen gaze still seemed to bore into her, a silent accusation. It was too specific, too unsettling to be merely random psychedelic blobs from degraded film. The composition was too deliberate, too focused on the horror. Amelia found herself glancing over her shoulder, a primal instinct she hadn't felt since she was a child, afraid of monsters under the bed. The attic was silent, save for the distant hum of traffic from outside, a sound that suddenly felt miles away, unreachable. She needed to prove it was a fluke. She needed to. With a renewed, almost desperate resolve, she aimed the camera again. This time she pointed it directly at the attic window, which offered a view of her grandmother's meticulously manicured rose garden, currently bathed in the gentle afternoon sun. A perfectly normal, utterly boring scene. She pressed the shutter. The whirring sound was louder this time, more insistent, almost aggressive. The camera shuddered slightly in her hands. Another blank photo slid out. Amelia snatched it, her fingers fumbling with urgency. She held it up, watching, waiting, her eyes fixed on the developing surface with a terrifying mixture of dread and morbid fascination. The grayness spread faster this time, like an ink stain across fabric. The image coalesced with sickening speed. It was the window, undeniably, but the rose garden outside was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of black clouds, lightning tearing through a sky the color of bruised plums. The glass of the window itself looked shattered, shards of ice clinging to the frame as if frozen in time. And pressed against the fractured pane, obscured by the storm and the distortion, was a face. It wasn't human. Its eyes were wide black pits reflecting no light. Its mouth was a gaping maw, stretched impossibly wide in a silent scream or a ravenous hunger. Its skin was mottled gray, a texture like ancient, decaying wood, and it was staring directly directly at the camera, directly at her. Amelia dropped the photo. It fluttered to the dusty floor, landing face up, the grotesque image staring accusingly at the ceiling. A cold, paralyzing fear seized her, wrapping around her like a shroud. This was no malfunction. This was no expired film. This camera wasn't taking pictures of reality. It was showing her something else. Something hidden. Something terrifying. Something that was trying to look back. And it was looking at her right now. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, seized Emily. It wasn't the kind of fear that made you scream. It was the kind that froze your breath in your lungs, turned your blood to ice, and locked your muscles in a rigid paralysis. Her hand, still gripping the Polaroid, trembled so violently the plastic casing rattled. The image in her palm, the one of her own apartment but with that unseen presence lurking in the periphery, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, a whisper of something ancient and hungry. She squeezed her eyes shut, a desperate attempt to reset, to unsee. This was ridiculous. It had to be. A trick of the light, a manufacturing defect, a momentary hallucination brought on by lack of sleep and too much caffeine. But when she opened them again, the photograph was still there. The unsettling blur still subtly shifting, still looking. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of her apartment. She tried to rationalize. Maybe the film was incredibly old, degraded in a way that produced bizarre distortions. Maybe the camera itself, a vintage find, had some peculiar internal flaw that manifested in these unsettling ways. She took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing herself to move. She needed to test it, to prove it was just a faulty piece of equipment. With a resolve born of sheer terror and a desperate need for normalcy, She aimed the camera at her bookshelf. Rows of familiar novels, a few potted succulents, a framed photo of her and her best friend, Sarah, laughing on a beach trip. Mundane. Safe. She pressed the shutter button. The whirring mechanism felt louder this time, more ominous. The blank white square slid out. Emily watched, transfixed, as the image slowly began to bleed into existence. First, the faint outlines of the books, then the vibrant green of the succulents. Her grip tightened. It was developing normally. See, just a glitch before. She was being silly. She almost laughed, a hysterical bubble of relief catching in her throat. But then as the colors deepened, something else began to emerge. Not in the foreground, not obviously, but tucked away in the shadows between two thick tomes, where a small gap existed. A sliver of something dark, something not a book, not a shadow. It was too precise, too angular to be a natural shadow, yet too indistinct to be clearly identifiable. It was like a shard of obsidian perfectly placed, reflecting no light, absorbing everything. And it wasn't there in her actual bookshelf. She knew her bookshelf. She dusted it weekly. There was no shard of anything between The Great Gatsby and Dune. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. Okay, one more time. She spun around, pointing the camera at her kitchen counter. A fruit bowl, a coffee maker, a stack of mail. Utterly innocuous. Click. Whir. The film ejected. This time the image developed faster. Or perhaps her perception of time had simply accelerated into a frantic blur. The fruit bowl materialized, ripe apples and bananas, the gleaming chrome of the coffee maker. But then on the counter, nestled amongst the bills and junk mail, was a single withered rose petal. Black at the edges, shriveled, yet impossibly vibrant in its decay. A stark splash of morbid beauty against the mundane white laminate. Emily stared. There was no rose in her apartment. She hated cut flowers, they always died too quickly. She hadn't bought one in years. Her rational mind screamed for an explanation. Infrared? UV light? Some unique photographic distortion? But the feeling in her gut, a primal ancient instinct, told her otherwise. This wasn't science. This was something else. The camera wasn't just distorting reality. It was revealing a layer of reality she couldn't see with her own eyes. A layer that held unsettling secrets. She looked at the 3 photographs spread on her coffee table. Her apartment, the bookshelf, the kitchen counter. Each one a snapshot of her familiar world. Subtly invaded, subtly warped. The unseen presence in the corner. The obsidian shard. The withered rose petal. They were disparate, yet they all spoke of something hidden. Something decaying, something wrong. A new, terrifying thought began to coalesce in her mind. What if these weren't just random anomalies? What if they were messages? Warnings. The word echoed in her head, cold and clear. Warnings. But warnings of what? And why her? Emily picked up her phone, her fingers fumbling over the screen. She needed to talk to someone. Someone level-headed, someone who would tell her she was being ridiculous, but also someone who would listen. Sarah. Hey Em. What's up? You sound weird. Sarah's voice, bright and cheerful, was a stark contrast to the growing panic in Emily's chest. Sarah, I think something's wrong. Really wrong. Emily's voice was a shaky whisper. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Remember that old Polaroid camera I bought last week at the flea market? Oh yeah, the funky vintage one. The one that looked like it belonged in a horror movie prop department. Sarah chuckled. What about it? Did you finally get around to taking some pics? I did, Emily said, her voice dropping. And the pictures aren't right. She paused, gathering her courage. They're showing me things, Sarah. Things that aren't there. Things that are unsettling. Sarah's chuckle died. Unsettling? Like bad selfies? Or did you accidentally take a picture of a ghost? There was a nervous edge to her humor now. I wish it was a bad selfie. Or a joke. It's like the camera sees things that are hidden. Things that are not good. Emily tried to explain, her words tumbling out in a rush, detailing the empty corner that wasn't empty, the obsidian shard, the withered rose. She could hear Sarah's growing skepticism, the slight hesitation before she spoke. Honey, are you sure you're okay? You haven't been sleeping much, have you? Maybe it's just really old film, totally degraded, causing weird chemical reactions. Or maybe the lens is cracked in a way that creates these optical illusions. I thought of that. I tried to rationalize it, but it's too specific, Sarah. Feels intentional. like it's trying to show me something. Emily felt a wave of frustration. How could she explain the profound sense of wrongness, the chilling certainty that this was more than just a camera malfunction? Okay, Sarah said, her tone softening. Look, I'm probably just overthinking it, but you're freaking me out a little. Can I come over? We can look at the pictures together. Maybe I'll see something you missed, a trick of the light, anything. Please, Emily breathed, relief washing over her. Please come. Less than 20 minutes later, Sarah was knocking on Emily's door, a bag of her favorite takeout in hand. Emergency comfort food, she announced, trying to lighten the mood. But her eyes, as she scanned Emily's pale face, were serious. They sat on the couch, the three unsettling Polaroid pictures laid out on the coffee table. Sarah picked up the first one, the one of Emily's apartment. She tilted it, squinted, even held it up to the window light. I mean, I see what you're talking about, Sarah admitted, her brow furrowed. That blur in the corner. It's definitely odd, but it could be anything. A smudge on the lens, a dust motes caught in the flash. She moved to the second one, the bookshelf. And this dark sliver. Could be a shadow, a really dark, weirdly shaped shadow. But it's not there, Emily insisted, pointing to her actual bookshelf. Go look. There's nothing there. Sarah sighed, clearly trying to remain calm. Okay, let's try something. Let's take another picture. Right now. Together. If it's the camera, it'll happen again, right? Emily hesitated, a fresh wave of fear washing over her. She didn't want to see what else the camera might reveal. But Sarah was looking at her, a mixture of concern and skepticism on her face. Emily knew she had to. She needed Sarah to believe her. She picked up the Polaroid, her fingers cold against the plastic. Okay, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She aimed it at them, sitting on the couch, surrounded by the familiar comfort of her living room. Sarah offered a small, reassuring smile, though her eyes darted nervously between Emily and the camera. Click. Whir. The white square slid out. Emily and Sarah watched, mesmerized, as the image began to develop. Their faces, a little blurry, started to appear. The couch, the throw pillows. And then, slowly, chillingly, something else. Behind Sarah's head, where the wall was bare and painted a light cream, a faint, almost translucent pattern began to emerge. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a dust mote. It was a faint, intricate spiderweb, shimmering with an unnatural silver sheen, stretching across the wall, directly behind Sarah. And at its center, barely visible, a dark, angular shape, like the obsidian shard from the bookshelf photo, but this one seemed to be pulsing. Sarah gasped, a sharp choke sound. She snatched the photo, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that mirrored Emily's own. She looked from the photo to the wall behind her, then back to the photo. Her face was ashen. There's nothing there, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. On the wall, nothing. Emily could only nod, her throat tight with unshed tears. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't an illusion. Sarah had seen it too. The camera was showing them something terrible. And this time the warning felt much more personal, much more immediate. The spiderweb, the pulsing dark heart. It felt like a snare. A trap. What is this thing, Em? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Her eyes, fixed on the photo, were filled with a dawning terror. What is this camera trying to tell us? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Emily stared at the developing image, at the sinister web behind her friend, and a single terrifying thought solidified in her mind. This wasn't just about her anymore. This camera, this cursed object, was dragging Sarah into whatever dark secret it held. And it wasn't just showing them things. It was showing them a future riddled with unseen dangers. And it was warning them to run. But from what? And where would they go? This cursed object was dragging Sarah into whatever dark secret it held. And it wasn't just showing them things. It was showing them a future riddled with unseen dangers. And it was warning them to run. But from what? And where would they go? The words hung in the air, a chilling echo in the otherwise silent room. Run. Michael stared at Sarah, his mind racing, trying to make sense of the impossible. Run from what? From whom? And where? Their suburban home, once a sanctuary of quiet comfort, now felt like a cage, its walls closing in. David, ever the pragmatist, was the first to break the heavy silence. Okay, this is beyond anything I can explain. A cursed object? A warning? Sarah, where did you even get this thing? Sarah looked up, her eyes wide and bloodshot, fixed on the Polaroid still clutched in her trembling hand. My grandmother's attic, she whispered, her voice barely audible. After she passed, my mom and I were cleaning it out. We found a dusty old box, hidden behind a loose floorboard. It had some of her old trinkets, some sepia-toned photos, and this camera. I thought it was just a cool vintage find. A piece of history. Her voice cracked, a sob catching in her throat. I never thought it was a warning. Emily, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke, her voice laced with growing fear. Your grandmother, Eleanor? Did she ever talk about anything strange? Any odd stories, old family legends? Sarah shook her head slowly. Not really. She was always so practical, so grounded. She loved gardening, baking, playing bridge. The most mysterious thing about her was her secret recipe for apple pie. She never mentioned anything like this. She gestured vaguely at the camera, then at the collection of disturbing photographs spread across the coffee table. Michael knelt beside her, taking her hand. We have to figure this out, Sarah. If this camera came from your grandmother, maybe there's something else in her things. A diary, letters, anything that could give us a clue. She might have known something. The idea, however desperate, offered a sliver of direction. David nodded in agreement. It's the only lead we have. We need to go back to that attic. If this thing is showing us the future, we don't have much time. The decision was made. The four of them, united by a shared, inexplicable terror, packed into Michael's SUV. The drive to Sarah's mother's house, only 20 minutes away, felt like an eternity. Each turn of the wheel seemed to pull them deeper into the unfolding nightmare. The familiar streets, usually bustling with evening joggers and kids playing, now seemed eerily quiet, the shadows lengthening with an ominous quality. Every car that passed, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of anxiety through them. They were running, as the Polaroid had instructed, but not away from something, but towards a potential answer, hoping to outrun the unknown threat. Arriving at the quiet two-story house, Sarah's mother, Brenda, was surprised to see them. Honey, what's wrong? You all look like you've seen a ghost. Sarah tried to offer a reassuring smile, but it faltered. Just needed to grab something from Grandma Eleanor's old boxes, Mom. Something I forgot. She exchanged a quick, meaningful glance with Michael, a silent plea for him to back her up. Michael stepped forward. Yeah, Brenda, Sarah was just telling us about some old photos she found up there. And we got curious about the family history. Thought we'd help her dig a bit more. Brenda, though still looking concerned, shrugged. Well, everything's still up there. Just try not to make too much of a mess. As they ascended the creaking attic stairs, the air grew thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten memories. Dust motes danced in the solitary beam of light filtering through a grimy window. Box after box filled with Eleanor's life sat stacked against the sloped walls. Old clothes, faded linens, forgotten holiday decorations. It was a treasure trove of the past, but tonight, it felt like a minefield. Okay, David said, pulling out his phone flashlight. Let's focus. We're looking for anything that mentions this camera, anything about strange events, or anything that seems out of place for Eleanor. They began to search methodically, their movements tense and hurried. Emily, usually meticulous, tore through boxes with a frantic energy. Michael and David sifted through old photo albums, letters, and journals, their eyes scanning for anything remotely unusual. Sarah, feeling the weight of the situation most acutely, felt drawn to a small, unassuming wooden chest tucked away in a corner, half hidden by a stack of moth-eaten blankets. It looked different from the other storage containers, more personal, perhaps even clandestine. Her fingers brushed against the cool metal clasp. It wasn't locked. She lifted the lid, revealing a collection of yellowed letters tied with a delicate silk ribbon, a small leather-bound journal, and a single unframed photograph tucked beneath them. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This felt like it. Guys, she called out, her voice a hushed whisper. I think I found something. They converged around her, their faces illuminated by David's phone light. Sarah carefully untied the ribbon on the letters. They were old, written in elegant cursive, dated from the 1960s. She began to read, her voice low and trembling. The letters were from a woman named Clara, a friend of Eleanor's, and they spoke of a shared secret, a terrible mistake they had made, and the unforeseen consequences that followed. One passage sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Eleanor, I can't shake this feeling. It's like something is watching us. A shadow clinging to our every move. That cursed object, it never should have been touched. It shows things, doesn't it? Things we wish we could unsee. Things that demand a price. Michael snatched up the journal. This might be Eleanor's. He flipped it open, scanning the pages. It wasn't a diary of daily events, but rather a collection of cryptic observations and warnings. One entry dated decades ago stood out. The lens sees beyond the veil. It grants foresight, but at a cost. The shadow grows with each glimpse. It hungers for what it reveals. Another entry, underlined multiple times, simply read, "Never let it leave the darkness." But it was the photograph beneath the letters that truly seized their attention. It was a black and white image, slightly faded, showing a group of young people, perhaps in their early 20s, gathered around a bonfire. Their faces were full of youthful exuberance, but one detail was chillingly familiar. In the center of the group, held aloft by a laughing young Eleanor, was a camera. The camera. And standing slightly apart in the very edge of the frame was a tall, gaunt figure, its face obscured by shadow, almost as if it had been deliberately smudged out. A dark, indistinct presence lurking at the periphery. As they stared at the photograph, the old Polaroid camera, which Sarah had instinctively brought with her, suddenly hummed. A low, almost imperceptible vibration rippled through the wooden floorboards. The empty slot where the next picture would emerge began to glow faintly. A collective gasp escaped them. Another picture was developing. Here in the dusty, forgotten attic. They watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the blank white rectangle slowly slid out. The chemical smell, now terrifyingly familiar, filled the air. This time the image began to form with startling speed. It wasn't a blurry landscape or a shadowy figure. It was a close-up. It was their living room window. Their own living room window as seen from the outside looking in. The glass was dark, reflecting the distorted shapes of the trees in their front yard. But in the very center, almost perfectly aligned with where they would have been sitting just hours ago, a dark, indistinct shape seemed to coalesce in the glass, a reflection of something that definitely wasn't in their living room. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its form seemed to absorb the light around it, creating a void in the reflection. And then, as the image fully developed, a single horrifying detail snapped into focus within that inky void. 2 pinpricks of glowing, malevolent red, like embers burning deep within a bottomless pit. The camera had shown them what was waiting. It wasn't a future warning. It was a present danger. It was watching their empty home. It was watching them. And it was here. The image on Michael's phone wasn't a trick of the light, wasn't a glitch in the feed. It was undeniably there. 2 points of glowing, malevolent red, like embers burning deep within a bottomless pit. The camera had shown them what was waiting. It wasn't a future warning. It was a present danger. It was watching their empty home. It was watching them. And it was here. Jessica's breath hitched, a strangled sound that tore through the sudden, suffocating silence of the coffee shop. The clatter of espresso machines, the murmur of conversations, the soft jazz playing overhead. It all faded into an indistinct hum as her world narrowed to the terrifying image on the screen. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream that threatened to erupt. Michael felt a cold dread seize him, a primal terror that rooted him to his seat. The phone slipped from his numb fingers, clattering onto the small table, the screen still showing those burning eyes, now slightly skewed. It wasn't just a picture anymore. It was live. It was real. "No," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible, a fragile plea against the impossible. "No, Michael, tell me that's not real." He couldn't. He picked up the phone, his hand trembling so violently he almost dropped it again. He zoomed in, his eyes desperately searching for an explanation. A trick of shadow, a reflection. But there was nothing. Just the unwavering, sinister glow of those eyes, fixed on something just beyond the camera's frame, or perhaps directly at the camera itself. A shiver, colder than any winter wind, snaked down his spine. It's inside the house," he choked out, his voice hoarse, disbelieving. "It's in our house." The realization hit them both with the force of a physical blow. Their sanctuary, their haven, the place they built their lives, was compromised. Invaded. And not by a common burglar. Not by flesh and blood. Michael's mind raced, a frantic scramble for logic in the face of the utterly illogical. Okay, think. We need to call the police. Right now. He fumbled for his phone again, his fingers clumsy with panic, and dialed 911. The line rang once, twice, then a burst of static crackled through the receiver, sharp and metallic like shattered glass. He pulled the phone away, frowning. He tried again. More static, then a low guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through his bones, utterly alien and deeply unsettling. It wasn't a busy signal. It wasn't a dropped call. It was interference. Deliberate. Jessica was already on her feet, pushing her chair back with a screech that drew a few curious glances from nearby patrons. "We have to go. We have to go now." "Go where, Jess?" Michael asked, his eyes wide, still staring at the phone screen, the red eyes unwavering. "It's there. It's in our house. And it's watching us." The last part was a whisper, a terrifying certainty that had solidified in his gut. The way the previous Polaroid had shown them, then the real-time security feed. It knew. It knew they were watching. It knew where they were. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through him. How? How could it know? Was it connected to the Polaroid? Was the camera itself compromised? "We need to get to the house," Jessica insisted, her voice tight with a desperate urgency. "Maybe it's still just in the living room. Maybe we can scare it away. Or see what it is." "Are you insane?" Michael shot back, his fear morphing into a protective anger. "Scare it away? Just look at those eyes. That's not some animal. That's not a person. We have no idea what that thing is or what it wants." But even as he spoke, a desperate, illogical pull toward their home tugged at him. Their memories, their life, their sense of safety. It was all tied to that house. Leaving it to this thing felt like abandoning a part of themselves. "We can't just sit here," Jessica pleaded, her eyes darting around the coffee shop, seeing only oblivious faces, normal lives unfolding. "We can't just let it be there." Michael knew she was right, even if his gut screamed for them to run in the opposite direction. He couldn't leave their home to this unknown entity. He couldn't. "Okay," he said, his voice firming with a grim resolve. "Okay, we go. But we don't go inside. We call the police from the car repeatedly. We stay outside. We observe. We don't engage." Jessica nodded, her face pale but determined. They scrambled out of the coffee shop, leaving their half-finished drinks and the lingering scent of fear behind them. The short drive home felt like an eternity, each street light casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch with unseen menace. Michael kept glancing at his phone, the image of the red eyes still there, a constant, sickening reminder. He tried calling 911 again. Still the static. Still that low guttural hum. "It's blocking us," Jessica breathed, her gaze fixed on the road ahead, her knuckles white on the dashboard. "It knows we're trying to get help. How is that even possible?" Michael muttered, his mind reeling. This was beyond a simple break-in. This was something else. Something supernatural. Something that defied every law of physics and common sense he knew. As they drew closer to their street, a suffocating silence descended upon them. The usual sounds of the neighborhood, dogs barking, children playing, distant traffic, were absent. It was as if their street had been swallowed by an unnatural quiet, a void of sound that pressed in on their eardrums. "Pull over here," Jessica whispered, pointing to a spot 2 houses down from theirs, partially obscured by a large oak tree. "We don't want to just drive up to the driveway." Michael parked the car, his heart hammering against his ribs. The engine cut out, plunging them into the heavy silence. He stared at their house, a familiar silhouette against the fading twilight. It looked normal, deceptively so. No broken windows, no forced doors, no signs of struggle. Yet he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that it wasn't empty, and it wasn't safe. "Do you see anything?" Jessica asked, leaning forward, straining her eyes. Michael shook his head slowly. "Nothing. No movement. No lights on, except for the street lamp reflecting off the living room window." He pulled out the Polaroid camera. It felt strangely inert, cold in his hand. He hadn't taken a picture since the one that showed the attic, the one that showed the source of this nightmare. He wondered if it would develop another warning now, a real-time update on the immediate threat. He almost pressed the shutter, but hesitated. What if it showed something worse? What if it showed them? "Michael," Jessica said, her voice barely a whisper, drawing his attention away from the camera. "Look at the front door." He followed her gaze. The front door, a solid oak panel with a small frosted glass insert, was closed, secure, but something was wrong. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer seemed to ripple across its surface, like heat haze off asphalt, but without any source of heat. And then, for a fleeting moment, he saw it. A dark, indistinct shadow seemed to press against the inside of the frosted glass, distorting the light, making the outline of something tall and gaunt briefly visible. Then it was gone. His blood ran cold. "Did you see that?" he breathed, his voice barely a rattle in his throat. Jessica nodded, her face ashen. It was tall and thin, like a stick figure but bigger. And it was moving. The entity was no longer just a pair of red eyes on a screen. It was a presence, a physical, terrifying presence, lurking within the walls of their home. "We need to call the police, Michael. We have to get through to them." Jessica's voice was edged with desperation. He tried again, his thumb hovering over the dial button for 911. He pressed it. The familiar dial tone began, then immediately dissolved into that same metallic static, followed by the low, guttural hum. It was like a barrier, an invisible wall of noise designed to cut them off, to isolate them. "It's not working," he said, slamming his hand down on the steering wheel in frustration and growing fear. "It won't let us." A sudden jarring thought struck Michael. The attic, the old wooden box, the strange, almost ritualistic symbols carved into its lid, the feeling of something ancient and malevolent emanating from within. The initial Polaroid, the one that started all of this, had been taken in the attic. And then the subsequent warnings, each one escalating, each one drawing them closer to this moment. "The attic," he said, speaking aloud his terrifying realization. "It started in the attic, Jess. When I found that box, when I took that first picture. This isn't just a random break-in. This is connected. The Polaroid. It's not just showing us warnings. It's showing us the consequences of something we did." Jessica stared at him, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "The box? The one with the strange carvings?" Michael nodded grimly. I think we woke something up. Or we released something. And now it's here. And it wants something." The silence in the car became unbearable, pressing down on them, amplifying the terrifying implications of his words. They hadn't just accidentally stumbled upon a haunted object. They had actively, unwittingly unleashed a force. And now that force was in their home watching them. Suddenly, a faint flicker caught Michael's eye. It came from their living room window. Not the reflection of the street lamp, but a soft, pulsing red light, deep within the house. It blinked once, twice, then steadied, a malevolent beacon in the growing darkness. It was those eyes, the red eyes from the security feed. They were no longer just a static image. They were alive. They were moving. And they were staring directly out of their living room window, straight at them. The entity wasn't just in their house. It was making its presence known. It was challenging them. It was waiting. And the message was clear. There was no escape now. The game had begun. And they were the players. Michael felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp, flood his veins. This wasn't just about calling the police anymore. This was about survival, about understanding what they had unleashed, and figuring out how to put it back, before it consumed everything they held dear. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "We have to figure out what that thing is, Jess. And we have to stop it." Jessica, her face still pale, met his gaze with a fierce determination he hadn't seen in her before. "How? Michael, how do we fight something we can't even touch? Something that blocks our calls and knows where we are?" He didn't have an answer. Not yet. But the red eyes in their living room, burning like twin hellfires, told him they didn't have much time to find one. The Polaroid had warned them. Now it was time to face the warning, or be consumed by it. The red eyes flickered, two burning coals in the deepening gloom of their living room, then vanished as abruptly as they had appeared. Michael gasped. A choked sound caught in his throat, and stumbled back, colliding with the sofa. Sarah let out a small, terrified whimper, her hand flying to her mouth, eyes wide and unblinking. The air in the room moments ago simply stale, now felt heavy, charged, as if something immense had just passed through, leaving an invisible residue of dread. Did you see that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible, shaking. Michael could only nod, his own voice lost somewhere in the sudden, icy grip of fear that tightened around his chest. He rubbed his eyes, frantically searching the spot where the eyes had been, half expecting them to reappear, to mock his disbelief. But there was nothing. Only the familiar shadows cast by the evening light filtering through the blinds, the comforting, mundane objects of their home, now imbued with a sinister potential. It was real, he finally managed, the words tasting like ash. The Polaroid. It wasn't just a picture. It was a warning. A live warning. Sarah edged closer to him, her body trembling. But what was it? What do red eyes mean? Is it an animal? A person hiding? She looked around, her gaze darting from corner to corner, under the coffee table, behind the curtains. Every shadow seemed to stretch, every creak of the old house amplified into a potential threat. It wasn't an animal, Sarah. Not like anything I've ever seen. And it certainly wasn't a person. There was no body, no shape, just eyes, floating in the air right there. He pointed a shaky finger towards the empty space near their fireplace. Burning. Like something from a nightmare. A cold sweat pricked at Michael's skin. The rational part of his brain screamed for an explanation, for a logical loophole, but there was none. They had both seen it. Unmistakably. The same red, malevolent glow that had materialized in the developing image. "We need to get out of here," Sarah urged, her voice rising in pitch. "Right now. We can call the police, tell them." Her voice trailed off. Tell them what? That a photograph showed glowing red eyes in their living room, and then those eyes appeared for real? They'd be laughed out of their own house, or worse, deemed delusional. And go where? Michael countered, his mind racing, trying to grasp at any semblance of control. It's our house, our home, and what if it follows us? What if it's not the house, but us? He remembered the initial photo, the one with his friend David and the faint figure behind him, then the figure in their living room. Was it tied to the camera? To them? He strode towards the small table where the Polaroid camera lay, next to the stack of developed photos. He picked up the latest one, the image of their living room with the unmistakable red eyes. He stared at it, his brow furrowed, as if by sheer force of will he could compel the photograph to yield its secrets. The eyes on the photo were still there, still burning, a stark, terrifying prophecy fulfilled. "It's the camera," he declared, a sudden, chilling certainty settling over him. "It has to be. Everything started when I bought it." Sarah hurried over, peering at the camera as if it were a venomous snake. "But how? It's just an old camera, Michael. A vintage toy." "No, it's not a toy," he said, turning the heavy, black plastic camera over in his hands. He ran his fingers along its smooth, worn surface, feeling the faint indentations of age. "It's something else. It doesn't just capture images, it captures warnings. Or maybe it creates them." He looked at the small, almost imperceptible scratch near the lens, the one he'd noticed when he bought it. It looked like a tiny stylized symbol, almost like a bird in flight, but distorted, sharp-edged. He dismissed it as an old scuff mark, but now, under the oppressive weight of their fear, it seemed significant, a brand. "Remember that antique shop?" Sarah asked, her voice thoughtful, a flicker of purpose in her fear-stricken eyes. "The one you bought it from? The old woman who owned it. She was strange, almost like she was expecting you." Michael paused, the camera still in his hands. He hadn't thought much of the shop owner, a woman with a maze of wrinkles and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of stories. He remembered her knowing smile, the way she'd practically pushed the camera into his hands, insisting it was meant for him. He'd attributed it to a good saleswoman, but now a cold knot formed in his stomach. "She said it had a spirit," he recalled, the memory surfacing with chilling clarity. "I thought she meant a nostalgic charm, a connection to the past." He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Turns out she meant literal spirits." "We need to go back," Sarah stated, her voice firmer now, a resolve born of desperation. "To that shop. She might know something. She might know what this thing is or how to stop it." Michael hesitated. Going back felt like walking into the lion's den, but staying here felt like waiting for the lion to come to them. And between the two, an active pursuit of answers, however terrifying, seemed marginally better than passive dread. "Okay," he agreed, his jaw tightening. "But we're not going empty-handed. We're taking all of them." He gestured to the stack of Polaroids. "Every single one. They're our evidence. Our only proof." He carefully gathered the photos. The first, with David, his back turned, the indistinct shadowy figure hovering behind him. The second, the empty living room, the shadow clearer, more defined. The third, the hallway, the shadow elongated, almost human-like, stretching towards their bedroom door. And the fourth, the most recent, their living room again, but this time the fiery red eyes, burning with an undeniable malevolence. As he handled them, a new detail, one he'd been too panicked to notice earlier, caught his eye on the back of the fourth photo. It wasn't just the glossy white surface. There was a faint, almost invisible watermark. He held it closer to the dim light, tilting it. It was the same stylized, distorted bird symbol he'd seen scratched on the camera body. Not a scratch then. A manufacturer's mark? Or something else entirely? "Look at this," he said, handing the photo to Sarah. "On the back. This symbol. It's on the camera too." Sarah squinted, her finger tracing the faint outline. "It's weird. I've never seen a Polaroid logo like that. And it's so small, almost hidden." "It's not a logo," Michael asserted, a new theory forming in his mind. "It's a signature. A mark. Maybe of whoever made this specific camera, or cursed it." The word felt heavy, archaic, yet terrifyingly appropriate. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't just about an old camera anymore. This was about something ancient, something dark, that had found its way into their modern lives, developing its insidious plan one terrifying photograph at a time. They needed to move quickly. The red eyes had been a direct, unambiguous threat, a manifestation of the Polaroid's warning. What would the next photo reveal? What would it do next? The thought spurred them into action. They dressed quickly, their movements sharp, efficient, fueled by a nervous energy. Michael grabbed his keys, Sarah her purse. As they reached the front door, Michael paused, his hand on the doorknob. He glanced back at the living room, a sense of profound unease washing over him. The room was dark now, the last vestiges of twilight fading, replaced by the oppressive blackness of night. He half expected to see the red eyes glowing in the deepest shadows, watching them leave. He felt a phantom chill, a sense of being observed, even though nothing was visible. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage or perhaps a trap. "Are you sure about this, Michael?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet, almost pleading. "What if she's part of it? What if she planned this?" "We don't know," Michael replied, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "But she's our only lead. And staying here means waiting for whatever those eyes belong to come back. I can't do that, Sarah. Not when it's getting closer. Not when it's already been in our living room." He thought of the escalating nature of the photos. A faint figure, a clearer shadow, a stretching form, and now burning eyes. The progression was chillingly logical. A story being told, image by terrifying image. He opened the door, the cool night air hitting their faces, a welcome shock after the stifling atmosphere of their home. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows down their quiet suburban street. Everything looked normal, peaceful, but Michael knew better. They were carrying a secret, a burden that had twisted their reality into something unrecognizable. They got into their car, the engine starting with a reassuring rumble that did little to calm their frayed nerves. Michael backed out of the driveway, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a flicker of red in their living room window, a final chilling farewell. But there was nothing, only the silent, dark house holding its secrets close. As they drove, the silence in the car was heavy, punctuated only by Sarah's occasional ragged breath. Michael gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The antique shop wasn't far, a 20-minute drive through the quiet, winding streets of their town. Each turn felt like a step deeper into the unknown, a journey guided by a cursed camera, and the desperate hope that an eccentric old shopkeeper held the key to their nightmare. He couldn't shake the image of those red eyes. They were burned into his mind, a constant, terrifying reminder of how vulnerable they were, how thin the veil between their ordinary life and something truly monstrous had become. The Polaroid had developed a warning, and now they were driving headfirst into the heart of it, praying they weren't too late. The roar of the engine was a hollow counterpoint to the frantic beat of their hearts. Streetlights blurred into streaks of sickly yellow and orange as the car devoured the miles, each turn of the wheel a desperate gamble against an unseen clock. The silence in the car was heavy, thick with unspoken fears and the chilling echoes of the latest Polaroid. It was a photograph of a place they knew, a place they had tried to forget, twisted by the unseen hand of their tormentor. The old Blackwell house. It stood on the edge of town, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised purple of the night sky, a monument to decay and forgotten tragedies. As children, they had whispered its name, dared each other to get close, but never truly breached its overgrown perimeter. Now they were hurtling towards it, drawn by a force more powerful than childhood superstition, the terrifying certainty that the answer, or at least the next piece of this monstrous puzzle, lay within its crumbling walls. The car shuddered to a halt a block away, tucked into the shadows beneath a gnarled oak tree. The engine died, plunging them into a silence even more profound than before. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a dog, sounds that only amplified the oppressive quiet that emanated from the Blackwell house. Its windows, dark and vacant, seemed to stare back at them, like the hollow eyes of a predator. "This is it, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, a fragile thread against the vastness of the night. He nodded, his jaw tight, eyes scanning the darkness. "It has to be. The last Polaroid, the angle, the dying rose bush. It's unmistakable." He pulled a flashlight from the glove compartment, its beam a weak promise against the encroaching gloom. "Stay close, and be ready for anything." They moved like ghosts themselves, creeping along the fractured sidewalk, their footsteps crunching softly on fallen leaves and broken glass. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. The house loomed larger with every step, its broken porch sagging, its once grand facade scarred by time and neglect. Boards were missing from windows, creating gaping black holes, and the front door hung askew, a silent invitation to the brave or the foolish. "It's open," she breathed, pointing to the crooked door. "Or broken in." He gripped her hand, a silent reassurance, and pushed the door inward. It groaned in protest, a sound like an old beast waking, before swinging open to reveal a maw of impenetrable darkness. The air inside was stagnant, thick with dust and the musty odor of forgotten lives. He flicked on the flashlight, its beam cutting a hesitant path through the gloom, revealing a grand foyer blanketed in cobwebs and debris. A staircase, its banister splintered, spiraled upwards into the unknown. "Nobody's been here in years," she murmured, her voice laced with a strange mixture of awe and dread. "Not legally, anyway." "Someone has," he countered, his voice low. "And they left us a message." They moved slowly, carefully, their senses on high alert. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of the wind outside, sent a jolt of adrenaline through them. The flashlight beam danced across peeling wallpaper, antique furniture draped in white sheets like shrouded corpses, and the ghostly shapes of forgotten lives. They checked the downstairs rooms first, a dusty living room with a grand but broken fireplace, a dining room where spectral dinners might have once been held, a kitchen filled with rusted appliances and the faint, lingering smell of something metallic, something vaguely unsettling. Nothing. No new Polaroids, no obvious signs of recent activity beyond the general decay. "Maybe we're wrong," she said, a flicker of desperate hope in her eyes. "Maybe it was just a red herring, a way to throw us off." "No," he said, his voice firm. "He wants us here. He always gets us where he wants us." His gaze lingered on the staircase. Upstairs. The ascent was slow, each step a test of the rickety structure. The stairs groaned under their weight, the sound echoing ominously in the silent house. At the top, a long dark hallway stretched before them, lined with closed doors. The air up here felt even colder, a palpable chill that raised goosebumps on their arms. "Which room?" she whispered, her voice tight with apprehension. He didn't answer immediately. He was listening, his head cocked slightly. There was a faint draft, a subtle shift in the air that suggested an open window, or perhaps something else. He pointed the flashlight down the hall, to the very last door on the left. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness deeper than the rest. They approached it with agonizing slowness, their hearts hammering against their ribs. The hinges didn't creak when he pushed it open further, a sign that perhaps it had been recently oiled, or simply opened often enough to lose its protest. The room inside was a child's bedroom, or what remained of one. A rusted metal bed frame stood against one wall, a tattered teddy bear slumped in the corner, its button eyes staring blankly. The wallpaper was faded, depicting whimsical scenes of woodland creatures, now stained and peeling. But it wasn't the decay that caught their attention. It was the center of the room. On the dusty floor, illuminated by the flashlight's trembling beam, lay a single pristine white sheet. And on the sheet, carefully arranged, were objects that made their blood run cold. There were photographs, not Polaroids but old faded snapshots, pictures of them as children, playing in their backyard, laughing at a birthday party, standing awkwardly for a school photo. Innocent, joyful moments, ripped from the fabric of their past. But they weren't alone. Interspersed among the photos were small, personal items. A tiny tarnished silver locket she remembered wearing as a girl. A chipped ceramic dinosaur figurine he had cherished. A worn friendship bracelet they had exchanged in elementary school. And then the new Polaroid. It was different from the others. It wasn't a cryptic image from their past, distorted and sinister. This one was stark, clear, horrifyingly current. It was a picture of the Blackwell house. Not from the outside but from within. The exact angle of the foyer looking towards the front door. And in the foreground, blurred but unmistakable, were two figures. Two figures who looked eerily like them just entering the house. A chilling realization dawned on them, colder than any draft in the old house. The photograph hadn't been developed days ago. It had been taken moments ago. It was a picture of them right now, entering the very house they stood in. "He's here," she whispered, her voice a raw, terrified gasp. "He's been watching us. He took this, he's still here." The air in the room seemed to constrict, suddenly suffocating. Every shadow deepened, every creak became amplified. The teddy bear's button eyes seemed to follow them. They weren't just investigating a crime scene. They were part of the scene, unwilling actors in a play written by a madman. The Polaroid wasn't just a warning. It was a taunt. A chilling declaration that their tormentor was not only steps ahead, but was actively present, orchestrating their every move, watching them fall into his carefully laid trap. A faint sound from downstairs, a soft, almost imperceptible scrape, echoed up the stairwell. It wasn't the house settling. It was deliberate. Someone was moving. Someone else was in the house. Their hearts pounded a frantic rhythm against their ribs, a primal scream trapped in their throats. They had walked right into the lion's den, and the lion was already home. The game wasn't just about discovery anymore. It was about survival. And the next move, they knew with absolute terrifying certainty, was not theirs to make. They froze, every muscle screaming for movement, but fear had locked them in place. The air, already thick with dust and dread, seemed to press in, suffocating them. A soft click echoed from somewhere deeper within the house, a sound so innocuous, yet it resonated with the finality of a prison door locking. Then the distinct creak of a floorboard from the floor above them. It wasn't a settling house sound. It was deliberate, heavy, and slow. Someone was walking. Someone was watching. Jessica clutched Michael's arm, her nails digging in, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Emily's eyes, wide with terror, darted frantically around the cavernous entry hall, searching for an escape route that wasn't there. David, usually the calmest, stood rigid, his hand instinctively reaching for the pocket where his phone lay. A useless brick of plastic and metal in this dead zone. The silence that followed the creak was even more suffocating, a pregnant pause before the storm. It was the silence of a predator assessing its prey. Then a low hum started, vibrating through the floorboards. It was faint at first, barely perceptible, but it steadily grew louder, a mechanical thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the house. It was a sound they hadn't heard before, not in all their previous visits. It was new, purposeful, and deeply unsettling. A single, bare bulb suspended from the ceiling in the main hall flickered, then died, plunging them into near-total darkness, save for the weak beam of Michael's flashlight. "Michael," Jessica whispered, her voice a thin thread of sound. "What was that?" He swung the flashlight beam wildly, illuminating swirling dust motes, peeling wallpaper, and the grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough, "but we need to find a way out. Now." They moved as one, a terrified huddle scrambling back towards the front door. But as Michael reached for the heavy brass knob, it turned with a sickening clunk from the other side, then clicked back into place. Locked. He tried again, twisting, pulling, pushing, but it was useless. The door was sealed. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through their dwindling composure. They were trapped. Truly trapped. The back door. Emily choked out, her voice cracking. The kitchen entrance. David, his face pale, nodded. "Right. Let's go. Stay together." They stumbled through the dining room, Michael's flashlight beam bouncing ahead, illuminating a path of forgotten furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts awaiting their resurrection. The hum intensified, a deep, resonant thrum that now felt like it was vibrating in their very bones. It was accompanied by a new sound, a faint, rhythmic thump-thump-thump, coming from the floor above. It sounded like something heavy being dragged, or perhaps someone walking with a pronounced limp. As they reached the kitchen, an acrid smell hit them, something metallic like ozone, mixed with a faint cloying sweetness. The kitchen, usually just another dusty, abandoned room, now felt like the heart of a machine. And then they saw it. On the old, greasy countertop, amidst scattered newspapers and expired food cans, lay a small black object. Polaroid camera. Not the one Michael had, but another older model. And beside it, face down, was a freshly developed photograph. Michael hesitated, his breath catching in his throat. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to ignore it, but the compulsion, the morbid curiosity that had drawn them into this nightmare, was too strong. He reached out, his hand trembling, and flipped the photo over. The image that stared back at them was chilling. It was a picture of the four of them, Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily, standing in the entry hall, exactly where they had been moments ago when the light died. Their faces in the photo were contorted with fear, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. In the background, just barely visible in the shadows behind them, was a tall, gaunt figure. Its face was obscured by shadow and a wide-brimmed hat, but its posture was unmistakable. It was watching them. It had been there. It was there. A collective gasp escaped them. This wasn't just a warning. It was a real-time surveillance report. The lion wasn't just home. It was toying with them. Suddenly, the kitchen lights flickered on, not the bright, sterile fluorescence of a modern kitchen, but dim, yellowed bulbs that cast long, dancing shadows, making every corner seem to writhe with unseen movement. The hum intensified, and the thump-thump-thump from upstairs grew louder, closer. "It knows we're here," Emily whimpered, tears streaming down her face. "It's been watching us the whole time." "There." David pointed a shaking finger towards a small, almost hidden door at the back of the kitchen, partially obscured by a leaning broom and a stack of rusted paint cans. "The pantry. It might have an exit." Without another word, they searched towards it. Michael yanked open the flimsy wooden door, revealing not a pantry, but a narrow, winding staircase descending into pitch blackness. The air that wafted up was cold and damp, smelling of earth and something else. Something metallic and faintly foul. "A cellar?" Jessica questioned, her voice laced with dread. "It's better than staying up here," Michael declared, desperation overriding caution. "We have to try." He led the way, his flashlight beam cutting a shaky path into the gloom. The stairs were old, rickety, and covered in a fine layer of grit. Each step groaned under their weight, echoing ominously in the confined space. The hum from upstairs, though slightly muffled, still vibrated through the stone walls, a constant reminder of the unseen presence above. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump also continued, now directly above them, as if whatever was making the sound was pacing the kitchen floor. They descended deeper, the air growing colder, heavier. The cellar was vast, a labyrinth of stone pillars and decaying wooden shelves. Bottles, jars, and forgotten tools lay scattered everywhere, coated in decades of dust and cobwebs. Michael swept his light across the space, revealing an old workbench laden with rusted implements, and further back, what looked like a series of heavy, locked wooden crates. "No windows," David muttered, his voice hollow. "No obvious exit." Just as despair began to truly set in, Michael's beam landed on something peculiar. Tucked away in a dark corner, half hidden behind a stack of old newspapers, was another door. This one was made of heavy reinforced steel, secured with multiple bolts and a large rusted padlock. It looked out of place in this ancient cellar, almost industrial, as if it had been installed much later. "Could be a storm shelter," Jessica suggested, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Or an escape tunnel." They rushed towards it, hope momentarily eclipsing their fear. Michael tried the padlock, but it was solid, unyielding. "It's locked," he sighed, the hope draining from him. "And I don't see a key." Just then, the hum from above abruptly ceased. The thump-thump-thump stopped. An eerie, profound silence descended, far more terrifying than any noise. It was the silence of a hunter who had cornered its prey, and was now closing in for the kill. Then from somewhere within the cellar itself, a new sound emerged. A soft, almost imperceptible clink. It was metallic, like a small tool dropping onto concrete. It was close. Too close. Michael spun around, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, sweeping across the pillars and shelves. Nothing. But the sound had been real. And it had come from behind them, from deeper within the cellar, past the steel door. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Before anyone could answer, the single weak bulb in the kitchen above them flickered back on, casting a faint, sickly yellow glow down the cellar stairs, illuminating the top few steps. And standing there, silhouetted against the dim light, was a figure. Tall, gaunt, its face obscured by the wide-brimmed hat, just like in the Polaroid. It held something in its hand. A camera. An old Polaroid camera. And as they watched, frozen in terror, it raised the camera, aimed it directly at them, and a flash erupted, momentarily blinding them. When their vision cleared, the figure was gone. But on the top step where it had stood, lay a newly ejected Polaroid photo, slowly developing in the faint light. Michael scrambled up the first few steps, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He snatched the photo. As the image sharpened, their blood ran cold. It was a picture of the steel door, the one they had just tried to open. But in the photo, the heavy padlock was gone, and the door was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of inky blackness beyond. A cold, metallic smell, stronger now, wafted from the partially open door. It wasn't just industrial. It was the smell of damp earth, rust, and something else. Something unmistakably organic. Something that had once been alive. They weren't just trapped in a house anymore. They were in a cage. And the steel door, once a symbol of hope, was now a gateway to an even deeper, more horrifying unknown. The game, they now realized with a sickening lurch, had never been about finding a way out. It had always been about finding a way in, and they had just been granted access. The next move was indeed theirs to make, but it was a move right into the very heart of the terror. It was a space that hadn't seen the sun in decades, maybe longer. The air, thick and cold, tasted of damp earth and something acrid, metallic, like old blood mixed with rust. Michael, still reeling from the realization that their quest had been a calculated lure, pushed harder on the loose panel in the study wall. It groaned, a sound like a dying beast, and then gave way completely, revealing a narrow vertical shaft of absolute darkness. Jessica shivered, a deep, bone-chilling tremor that had nothing to do with the sudden drop in temperature. This isn't right," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rush of her own blood. "Every warning, every picture, it led us here. But it feels like walking into a trap." Emily, ever the pragmatist, clicked on her powerful tactical flashlight, its beam piercing the gloom. A trap, or the answer to everything? "We're not turning back now." Her light revealed a crude, hand-dug tunnel, shored up with rotting timbers, descending steeply into the earth. The walls were slick with moisture, and a faint, sickly green moss clung to patches. David, usually the most skeptical, swallowed hard. His face was pale in the harsh light. "After all this, after what we've seen, I don't think we have a choice. It's like we're on rails, heading straight for whatever this is." Michael, holding their Polaroid camera tightly, took a deep breath. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, almost burning his nostrils. He was acutely aware of the weight of the camera in his hand, a conduit to the unknown, a silent observer that had orchestrated their journey. "All right," he said, his voice firm, masking the tremor he felt deep inside. "Emily, you lead with the light. David, you're next. Jessica, stay close to me. We go slow. We go together." One by one, they squeezed through the opening, descending into the claustrophobic passage. The dirt floor was uneven, treacherous, and the air grew heavier with each step, pressing down on them. The tunnel twisted and turned, disorienting them, until after what felt like an eternity, it opened into a small square room. This wasn't a natural cavern. The walls were rough-hewn concrete, stained with what looked like mineral deposits and, in places, something darker. The ceiling was low, crisscrossed with thick, dust-laden pipes. In the center of the room stood a heavy, ornate wooden desk, covered in a thick shroud of dust and cobwebs, yet somehow appearing untouched by true decay. On the desk, precisely arranged, were a leather-bound journal, a stack of meticulously labeled index cards, and a peculiar antique camera unlike their Polaroid. A bulky, brass and wood monstrosity with an accordion-like bellows. Wires snaked from it, disappearing into a crude, box-like device built into the desk itself. The air in this room was different. It thrummed with a low, almost imperceptible vibration, a static electricity that made the hairs on their arms stand on end. There was a palpable sense of presence, a lingering echo of intense focus, of desperate, obsessive work. Emily, ever cautious, swept her light around the room. Look at this place, it's like a time capsule. No, more like a laboratory. Someone was working down here for a very long time. Jessica's eyes were fixed on the journal. It feels cold but not empty, like someone just stepped away. Michael, still clutching the Polaroid, felt a strange pull towards the desk. He reached out, his fingers brushing the dusty leather of the journal. It felt ancient yet vital. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with elegant, precise handwriting that, as he turned the pages, gradually devolved into a frantic, almost illegible scrawl. The first entry, it's dated 1968, Michael read aloud, his voice hushed. My name is Eleanor Vance. I have seen glimpses, fragments. The fire. I saw it before it happened. I tried to warn them, but they didn't listen. They couldn't see what I saw. But I will make them see. I will find a way to capture the echoes, to turn the future into a photograph. A collective gasp went through the group. Eleanor Vance. The name resonated with a chilling familiarity, as if it had been waiting for them. This was it. This was the origin. Emily leaned closer, her light illuminating the increasingly desperate entries. She was trying to build something to see the future, like our camera. Listen to this, Michael continued, his voice strained. The optics are complex. The developing solution even more so. I need to attune it to the temporal frequencies, to the very fabric of time itself. The warnings are becoming clearer, but they are still fleeting. I catch glimpses of the aftermath, never the cause. How can I intervene if I only see the consequence? The journal entries painted a picture of a brilliant mind descending into an all-consuming obsession. Eleanor Vance, driven by grief and a terrifying, nascent ability to perceive fragments of the future, had dedicated herself to creating a device that could not only capture these temporal echoes, but perhaps even alter them. She spoke of chemical compositions, unique developing processes, and the painstaking construction of a temporal lens to focus these visions. She was trying to build their Polaroid. David pointed to the index cards. What are those? Emily carefully picked one up. They're experiment logs. Each one details a date, a set of parameters, and an outcome. Most of them say failure, distorted image, or temporal feedback loop. Subject experienced severe disorientation. But some mention a clearer image. A warning. As Emily read, Michael felt a tremor pass through the Polaroid camera in his hand. A low hum emanated from it, growing steadily, vibrating against his palm. The lens, without any input from him, slowly extended, like an eye opening in the darkness. A soft, internal click echoed in the silent room. The camera had just taken a picture. They watched, mesmerized and terrified, as the blank white square slowly slid out of the camera's slot. It began to develop, not into a picture of them, or of the dusty room, but into something far more disturbing. The image was grainy, distorted, but unmistakably of Eleanor Vance. She was older than her journal entries suggested, gaunt and wild-eyed, standing in this very room, staring not at them, but at something just beyond the frame, her face contorted in a silent scream of pure, unadulterated terror. Behind her, the concrete wall seemed to shimmer, a swirling vortex of indistinct shadows and fractured light, a tear in the fabric of reality itself. Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's her. But what is she looking at? Michael's eyes darted from the horrifying Polaroid to the journal. There, tucked beneath the antique camera on the desk, was a loose final page torn from the journal. His hands trembled as he picked it up. The handwriting was almost unintelligible, scrawled in a frantic, desperate hand. I built it, Michael read, his voice barely a whisper, the words catching in his throat. I opened the door. Not to the past, not to change what was, but a door for something. Something that saw me. That heard my pleas. It entered. It learned from my device. It learned how to see, how to warn, not to save but to play, to orchestrate. Feeds on hope, on fear. The Polaroid, it is its eye. The warnings, they are its whispers. It became me. It is me. And now it waits for others to find its game, to come to its heart. As Michael finished reading, the entire room plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. Emily's flashlight had flickered, then died, plunging them into a blackness so profound it felt like a physical weight. The low hum from the antique camera on the desk intensified, growing into a guttural growl that vibrated through the concrete floor, up their legs into their very bones. Then, with a sickening lurch, the hundreds of old, faded Polaroids that covered the far wall, a wall they hadn't noticed until now, suddenly flared with a faint macabre light. Their horrifying images, distorted faces, shadowy figures, glimpses of suffering, briefly illuminated the chamber, revealing a tall, impossibly thin shadow standing perfectly still in the very doorway they had just entered. The macabre light from the developing Polaroids pulsed around them like a dying heart, painting the impossibly thin shadow in the doorway with fleeting, distorted colors. It was less a figure and more an absence, a tear in reality that absorbed all light, yet its outline was undeniably humanoid, impossibly elongated, with limbs that seemed to stretch into infinity, almost touching the ceiling of the oppressive chamber. Michael felt his breath catch, a cold, sharp pain in his chest. Jessica's hand, still clutching his, was clammy and trembling violently. They stood frozen, every muscle screaming but utterly unresponsive. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable dread that pressed down on them, stealing the oxygen from their lungs. The faint, metallic tang of the chamber sharpened, mixed now with something else. Something ancient and acrid, like ozone after a lightning strike, but far more sinister. The Polaroids, still drifting to the floor, continued their silent, horrifying display, each new image a fleeting whisper of agony, and with each flash the shadow seemed to solidify, to gain a fraction of a dimension it hadn't possessed before. It didn't move, not consciously at least, but the space around it seemed to warp, to ripple like heat haze over asphalt, distorting the ancient symbols carved into the stone walls behind it. It was like looking into a black hole that had taken the form of a man, a void that radiated pure, unadulterated malevolence. "Michael," Jessica whispered, her voice barely a breath, a fragile thread of sound that seemed to shatter the profound silence. "What is that?" He couldn't answer. His throat was a desert, his mind a chaotic storm of primal terror. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to fight, to simply cease to exist. But his feet were rooted to the spot, his body paralyzed by a fear so profound it bordered on reverence. This wasn't just a threat. It was an entity beyond their comprehension, beyond their world. Then, a new Polaroid developed in his hand. This one, unlike the others, wasn't a distorted face or a glimpse of suffering. It was a close-up, grainy image of the very doorway they had just entered, showing exactly what stood there now. The impossibly thin shadow. But beneath it, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, was a single stark word: doom. As the word solidified on the photo, a low, guttural sound emanated from the doorway. It wasn't a growl or a moan, but something far more unsettling. A sound that resonated deep within their bones, a vibration that felt like the earth itself was groaning in agony. It was the sound of countless voices whispering in unison, yet utterly devoid of human emotion, a chorus of despair that spoke of eons of suffering. The shadow, still unmoving, seemed to stretch further, its form elongating, its edges blurring into the surrounding darkness. The air around them grew colder, so cold that Michael could see his own breath, a wispy cloud in the stagnant air. He felt a burning sensation on his skin, like 1,000 needles pricking him simultaneously. Jessica gasped, clutching his arm tighter, her nails digging into his flesh. "It knows we're here," she whimpered, her eyes wide with terror fixed on the doorway. "It knows about the photos." The thought struck Michael with the force of a physical blow. The warnings weren't just about what was coming. They were about this. This entity, this shadow, was the source, the architect, or perhaps the ultimate manifestation of the terror the Polaroids had been trying to convey. The word doom was not a warning of an impending event, but a declaration of their current state. He had to do something. They couldn't just stand there and wait to be consumed by this thing. His gaze darted around the chamber, searching desperately for an escape, an explanation, anything. The altar, still covered in dust and ancient carvings, seemed to mock them with its silent, ominous presence. The symbols on the wall, which he had dismissed as mere decoration, now seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent energy, as if feeding off the despair in the room. His eyes fell on a small, intricately carved stone pedestal beside the altar, almost hidden in the shadows. On it, resting amidst a scattering of dried, brittle leaves, was a single tarnished silver locket. It looked out of place, almost too mundane for such a terrifying setting. Yet, something about it called to him, a faint whisper of familiarity in the chaos. As if drawn by an invisible string, Michael took a tentative step towards the pedestal. The shadow in the doorway did not move, but the low guttural murmur intensified, filling the chamber with a suffocating pressure. It felt like walking through treacle, every movement an immense effort. Jessica, still clinging to him, stumbled along, her eyes never leaving the horrifying silhouette in the doorway. Each step was a monumental act of defiance against the palpable dread radiating from the entity. Michael could feel its gaze, a formless, all-encompassing awareness that penetrated his very soul, dissecting his fears, his hopes, his will to survive. It was an assault not just on his body but on his sanity. Finally, he reached the pedestal. The locket was cold to the touch, heavy for its size. As his fingers closed around it, a faint warmth spread through his hand, momentarily pushing back the icy chill of the chamber. He flipped it open. Inside, on one side, was a faded sepia-toned photograph of a young woman with kind, intelligent eyes, a gentle smile playing on her lips. She looked vaguely familiar, her features stirring a distant memory he couldn't quite grasp. On the other side, meticulously inscribed, was a single date: October 27, 1985. The date hit him like a jolt of electricity. It was the exact date etched on the back of the very first Polaroid he had found in the attic, the one showing their house, perfectly normal, before the warnings began. This locket, this woman were connected to the origin of everything. As he stared at the locket, the humming sound from the doorway intensified into a vibrating roar that shook the very foundations of the chamber. The shadow moved. Its impossibly long, thin arm slowly, deliberately began to raise, pointing a skeletal finger directly at the locket in Michael's hand. A new Polaroid, the last one clutched in Michael's other hand, began to develop furiously. This wasn't a grotesque image or a word of doom. It was a detailed drawing, a diagram of the locket he held, but with an added crucial detail: a small, almost invisible latch on its side, one he hadn't noticed. Below the drawing, a new warning appeared, stark and urgent. "Do not open further. It will be released." "What does it mean, Michael?" Jessica cried, her voice cracking with terror. "Released? What will be released?" He looked from the locket to the developing Polaroid, then back to the shadow, its skeletal finger still pointing. The entity wasn't just observing them. It was responding, reacting to their actions. The locket was clearly important, a key to something, and the Polaroid was warning him not to use it, not to open it further than he already had. But the shadow was pointing at it with such intent. Was it a warning from the shadow or a threat? Was the shadow trying to prevent him from doing something, or forcing his hand? The ambiguity was paralyzing. He looked at the faded photograph of the woman inside the locket. Her eyes, even in the sepia tone, seemed to hold a desperate plea. He felt an inexplicable urge to protect her, to understand her connection to this nightmare. The date: October 27, 1985. The beginning. "This locket," Michael said, his voice hoarse. "It's from the same day as the first Polaroid. The day it all started." He showed Jessica the locket, then the new Polaroid. "This says, 'Do not open further. It will be released.'" The roaring from the doorway grew louder, more frantic, as if the shadow was becoming agitated by their discussion, by their proximity to the locket. Its form seemed to undulate, to shimmer at the edges, hinting at an unimaginable power barely contained. The sense of oppressive cold intensified, and Michael felt a dizzying wave of nausea wash over him. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they were standing on the precipice of something truly catastrophic. The Polaroids hadn't just been warnings, they had been breadcrumbs leading them here, to this moment, to this chamber, to this impossible choice. The locket was a Pandora's box, and the shadow was either its guardian or its prisoner. He had to make a decision, and fast. The shadow's agitated state indicated its patience was wearing thin. Was the release something that would help them or condemn them? The Polaroid's warning was explicit: "Do not open further." Yet, the entity's focus on it was equally explicit. What if the Polaroid, too, was a deception, a final trap? What if released meant released from the shadow? Michael's fingers instinctively traced the tiny latch on the side of the locket, the one revealed by the Polaroid. It was almost imperceptible, designed to be hidden. A part of him screamed to ignore the warning, to find out what lay beyond the faded photograph, to unlock the true secret of October 27, 1985. The other part, the part that had witnessed the horrors of the developing Polaroids, urged extreme caution. The air thrummed with the shadow's silent, vibrating demand. It was a question, an ultimatum hanging heavy in the air. What would he choose? The explicit warning from the Polaroid, or the silent, terrifying insistence of the entity that had haunted them for weeks? The fate of their very existence seemed to hinge on this single impossible decision. The suffocating pressure was a physical weight on Michael's chest, squeezing the air from his lungs. His mind screamed for release, for the sweet oblivion that opening the chest promised, but the Polaroid's stark black letters burned behind his eyelids. Do not open the chest. Jessica clung to him, a whimpering, trembling anchor in the storm of his terror. He could feel her fragile sanity fraying, her desperate pleas for it all to stop echoing in the silent, screaming corners of his mind. He looked down at his hand, hovering mere inches from the tarnished brass clasp of the antique chest. The entity's presence surged, a roaring silence that vibrated through every cell of his body, urging, insisting, demanding he yield. The air grew impossibly cold, then impossibly hot, a dizzying, disorienting assault. Whispers became a cacophony of distorted voices, pressing in from all sides, repeating his name, Jessica's name, twisting them into grotesque accusations. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. With a guttural cry that seemed ripped from his very soul, Michael slammed his fist down on the lid of the chest, the impact resonating through the dusty attic like a gunshot. No! He roared, his voice cracking, defiant against the invisible tormentor. I won't do it. I won't let you out. The world exploded. It wasn't a physical explosion, but a maelstrom of sensory overload. The whispers transformed into ear-splitting screeches, 1,000 tortured souls howling in unison. The temperature plummeted to an Arctic chill, instantly frosting their breath in the air, then swung wildly to a suffocating heat that made their skin prickle and burn. Every light bulb in the attic burst, showering them in sparks and plunging the space into absolute darkness, broken only by the faint, flickering light of the camera's lens on the small table nearby. Shadows, previously fleeting and indistinct, now coalesced into terrifying, shifting forms in the periphery of their vision. They writhed and contorted, mimicking grotesque figures, their silent movements more horrifying than any monster. Objects in the attic began to fly, not with violent force, but with an unnerving, deliberate slowness. An old rocking horse creaked back and forth with impossible speed. A stack of forgotten books levitated and spun before dropping with a deafening thud. Jessica screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror. She clutched Michael, burying her face into his shoulder, her body convulsing. Michael, please. Make it stop. I can't take it anymore. Just open it. Please just open it. Her words were choked with tears, her voice barely audible above the rising tempest. The entity was attacking her directly now, twisting her perceptions, making her see things Michael couldn't, hear things that drove her to the brink of madness. He could feel her trembling uncontrollably, her heart hammering against his chest. He knew with a chilling certainty that her sanity was hanging by a thread, and the entity was expertly snipping at it. He hugged her tighter, trying to shield her from the unseen onslaught, his own mind reeling. He could hear his name being whispered from every direction, feel icy fingers tracing patterns on his back, the air growing heavy with a metallic, coppery scent like old blood. This wasn't merely a haunting anymore. It was an active, malevolent assault, a punishment for his defiance. But then through the chaos an insistent click echoed. The sound was impossibly clear, cutting through the cacophony like a knife. It was the Polaroid camera. Michael's head snapped towards it, his eyes straining in the near-total darkness. A small square of white began to emerge from the slot, slowly, inexorably, into the light. He had to get to it. He had to. Hold on, Jessica, he gasped, his voice hoarse, pulling her with him as he stumbled towards the table. The floorboards beneath them seemed to shift and groan, the very air pushing against them, trying to impede their progress. The whispering intensified, mocking, threatening, promising eternal torment. He reached the camera, his hand shaking as he snatched the developing picture. He held it up, trying to make sense of the blurry image in the faint glow from the camera's lens, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. It wasn't a warning this time. It wasn't a distorted image of a future horror. It was a close-up, an extreme close-up of something incredibly mundane, something he'd seen 1,000 times but never truly looked at. It was a section of the living room wall, just above the old and used fireplace. Specifically, it showed a single, slightly discolored brick, barely noticeable, sitting a fraction of an inch deeper than the bricks around it. A tiny, almost imperceptible fissure ran along its top edge. A clue. It was a clue. The fireplace, he mumbled, his mind racing, trying to process this new directive amidst the overwhelming terror. Jessica, the fireplace. In the living room. He didn't wait for her response, just pulled her down the attic stairs, stumbling in the darkness, the entity's fury chasing them. The house continued its violent protest. Doors slammed shut on their own, distant shattering sounds echoed from rooms below, and the air grew thick with a palpable sense of rage. Each step down the creaking stairs felt like traversing a gauntlet of unseen horrors. They burst into the living room, the relative calm there a jarring contrast to the attic's pandemonium, though the oppressive cold and the faint, menacing whispers still permeated the space. Michael dragged Jessica towards the fireplace, his eyes scanning frantically for the brick from the Polaroid. "There!" he cried, spotting it instantly. The discolored brick, just as pictured, slightly recessed, with a faint hairline crack. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and pushed. It didn't budge. He pushed harder, digging his fingernails into the mortar. Nothing. "It's not moving," Jessica sobbed, pulling at his arm, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Michael, it's getting worse. I can feel it. It's like it's inside my head." He ignored her, his focus narrowed to the brick. He tried wiggling it, feeling for any give. There was none. He was missing something. The Polaroid showed this brick, not just any brick. He looked closer at the picture, trying to find a detail he'd missed. The fissure. The tiny crack. He ran his finger along the crack. It was barely visible, a hairline fracture in the old brick. But as his finger traced it, he felt a minute give, a slight indentation. Not a crack, but a seam. A hidden door. He pushed again, his thumb pressing directly on the seam. This time with a faint click, the brick didn't move inward, but outward, pivoting on an unseen hinge. Behind it was a small dark recess in the wall. Reaching inside, Michael's fingers brushed against something cool and metallic. He carefully pulled it out. It was a small, intricately carved wooden box, no bigger than his palm, dark with age, its surface smooth and worn from countless touches. It was bound with a tarnished silver clasp. The entity's presence in the living room intensified immediately, a sudden surge of cold that made the hairs on Michael's arms stand on end. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, filled with a new note of desperation, almost fear. It was reacting to the box. "What is it?" Jessica whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and morbid curiosity. Michael fumbled with the clasp. It was stiff, but with a sharp tug it sprang open. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was an ancient, tarnished silver locket. It was oval-shaped, intricately engraved with swirling patterns that seemed to mimic forgotten symbols. Beside it lay a single brittle piece of parchment, folded multiple times, its edges yellowed and crumbling. As Michael's fingers brushed against the locket, a shock, not of pain but of intense cold, shot through him. The entity's whispers, which had been growing louder, suddenly recoiled as if burned. The cold in the room momentarily lessened, and the suffocating pressure eased, just for a second. The locket had a power. He carefully picked up the parchment. It felt fragile, as if it might disintegrate in his hands. He unfolded it with agonizing slowness. The writing was faded, in an old-fashioned script, but still legible. It was a fragment of a diary entry, dated nearly a century ago. October 27th, 1923. Asterisk, the tether is weak. The entity grows restless. It yearns for release, but its freedom would spell ruin for all. I have bound it, not to imprison, but to contain the true horror within the chest. That cursed relic brought from the old country holds a power far greater, far more malevolent than I could have imagined. I tried to use it to control it, and instead I trapped myself. My spirit, tethered to this house, desperately tries to warn, but my voice is distorted, my methods crude, born of fear. The locket is the key. Forged in pure silver, blessed by ancient rites, it alone can sever the connection, not to the chest, but to the spirit that tries to break free. It must be taken to the highest point, beneath the moon, and the words spoken. Only then can true peace be found, For both the trapped spirit and the insidious darkness it guards. Michael's eyes darted between the parchment and the locket in his hand. The tether, the spirit that tries to break free, he murmured, his mind reeling. The entity that had tormented them for weeks wasn't the ultimate evil. It was a trapped spirit, distorted by its own torment, trying to warn them away from the chest, from the true horror it contained. And the Polaroid all along had been guiding them to the real solution, to free the spirit and contain the greater evil. He looked at Jessica, whose eyes were fixed on the locket, a flicker of something akin to hope, however faint, appearing in their depths. This is how we stop it, he said, his voice gaining strength. This is how we free it. But the respite was short-lived. The entity, sensing their discovery, sensing its impending release or further containment, erupted in a fresh wave of fury. The house groaned louder, the floor beneath them vibrated violently, and a gust of icy wind, impossibly strong, tore through the living room, rattling the windows in their frames. A heavy ceramic vase from the mantelpiece flew across the room, shattering against the wall with a deafening crash. The whispers returned, no longer just menacing, but filled with a raw, guttural roar of pure, unadulterated rage. Highest point beneath the moon. Michael read again, his eyes scanning the parchment. The roof. We have to go to the roof. The roof. Jessica gasped, her voice trembling. But how? And what if it's a trap? What if it's lying? It's our only chance, Jessica. The Polaroid led us here. This is it. Michael clutched the locket and the parchment. The house was shaking around them, the sounds of snapping wood and breaking glass echoing from unseen rooms. The entity was fighting back, desperate, furious. It was no longer a silent tormentor. It was a physical force, tearing the house apart to keep them from their goal. They had to move. Now, they scrambled towards the back door, the shortest path to the exterior and hopefully away to the roof. As they reached the kitchen, the air grew thick with a putrid, sickening stench, and a black, swirling mist began to coalesce in the center of the room, growing rapidly, forming a vaguely humanoid shape of utter darkness. It was manifesting. The entity was manifesting. Its silent screams filled their minds, promising pain, promising death, promising an eternity of terror. Michael pushed Jessica ahead of him, the locket clutched tight in his hand, its coldness a small comfort against the encroaching dread. The door was only feet away, but the swirling darkness was growing, its tendrils reaching, grasping. This was it. The final stand. Michael pushed Jessica forward, his own feet heavy. The darkness wasn't just swirling now. It was solidifying, forming grotesque, shifting shapes that writhed like tormented shadows. They were almost at the door, but a tendril, thicker than the rest, whipped out, snaking around Jessica's ankle. She cried out, stumbling. Michael reacted instantly, pulling her back with a strength he didn't know he possessed. His hand still clamped around the locket. As the darkness recoiled slightly from the locket's proximity, a chilling whisper permeated the air. Not a voice, but a chorus of sorrow and defiance. Mine. Safe. Never leave. Michael's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a malevolent entity. It was something else entirely. The words, the desperate possessiveness, resonated with a twisted familiarity. He looked at the locket, its silver surface now faintly glowing, a soft internal luminescence. He felt a surge of warmth, then a sharp, almost painful jolt. Suddenly, the world around him fractured. The swirling darkness vanished, replaced by a blinding white light. He wasn't in the hallway anymore. He was standing in the same house, but it was different. Newer. Brighter. He saw his grandmother, Eleanor, younger, vibrant, but with a haunted look in her eyes. She was cradling a small framed photograph. A man with kind eyes, a gentle smile. Robert. His grandfather. He saw flashes. Eleanor laughing with Robert in the garden. Then a sudden violent storm. A tree crashing. A desperate cry. Robert lying still beneath splintered wood, his eyes wide, unseeing. Eleanor's scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that echoed through Michael's very bones. The scene shifted. Eleanor, years later, a shadow of her former self, meticulously documenting every creak, every shadow in the house. She was obsessed, drawing strange symbols, murmuring to herself. He saw her with the Polaroid camera, snapping pictures of empty rooms, then staring at the developing images, her face etched with a desperate hope, a frantic terror. She was seeing things Michael himself had seen. Shadows, warnings, dangers. But they weren't random. They were specific. He watched as she tried to warn Robert before the storm, before the accident. She'd had a premonition, a vivid dream, but Robert, ever practical, had dismissed it. The guilt had devoured her. She believed she could have saved him. She believed if only she had been more insistent, if only she had found a way to show him the danger, he would still be alive. The locket in Michael's hand grew warmer, pulsating. He saw Eleanor in her final years, her mind slipping, her fear for Michael becoming paramount. She saw him as a reflection of Robert, vulnerable, unknowingly walking into unseen dangers. She believed the house itself was cursed, that it held the echoes of tragedy, waiting to repeat itself. She poured all her remaining will, all her love, all her terror, into the only thing she felt could truly communicate warnings. The Polaroid camera, a device that captured fleeting moments, now imbued with her desperate desire to capture future moments, to show him what was coming. The darkness, the entity that had been chasing them, wasn't a separate malevolent force. It was Eleanor's grief, her guilt, her overwhelming, suffocating love for Michael, twisted and corrupted by her own unresolved trauma. It wasn't trying to kill him. It was trying to protect him in the most extreme, misguided way possible by never letting him leave, by trapping him in a safe bubble, away from the dangers of the outside world that had taken Robert from her. The warnings on the Polaroid weren't just about external threats. They were her desperate pleas, her fragmented consciousness trying to guide him, to make him see the danger of leaving the house. The entity was a distorted echo of her own consciousness, a manifestation of her darkest fears and her most profound love. The vision faded and Michael was back in the hallway, the swirling darkness still reaching, but now he understood. He looked at Jessica, her eyes wide with terror, then back at the shifting shadows. "It's not trying to hurt us," Michael said, his voice hoarse but firm. "Not truly. It's trying to keep us here. It thinks it's protecting us." Jessica stared at him, confused, but the conviction in his voice made her pause. "Eleanor," Michael whispered, his gaze fixed on the darkness, on the swirling shapes that were now less monstrous, more like a desperate, grasping embrace. "Grandma, I understand. I know what happened to Grandpa Robert. I know you tried to warn him. I know you blamed yourself." The darkness hesitated, its tendrils recoiling slightly, as if struck by an invisible force. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh seemed to ripple through the air. "But you can't keep me here," Michael continued, his voice resonating with a newfound strength, fueled by understanding and compassion. "This isn't protection. This is a prison. Grandpa Robert wouldn't have wanted this. And you, the real you, wouldn't want this for me either." He held the locket up, its faint glow intensifying, casting a warm golden light against the oppressive shadows. "This locket, it was his. A gift to you. It represents your love, your true love. The love that lets go, that trusts, that allows life to be lived, even with its risks." The darkness began to ripple violently, not in aggression, but in turmoil, like a storm battling itself. The whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of sorrow and fear, interspersed with faint, loving murmurs. "Danger. Always danger. Protect. My boy. Robert. Gone." "I know," Michael said, his voice cracking with emotion, tears welling in his eyes. "I know you lost him, and I know you loved him more than anything. But I'm not Robert. And I need to live my own life, Grandma. I need to make my own choices. And I need to be free." He took a step forward, towards the heart of the swirling darkness, pulling Jessica with him. She gasped but didn't resist, her eyes fixed on Michael's determined face. "The warnings," Michael continued, his voice a plea and affirmation. "They helped me. They led me here to understand. But now I need to choose my own path. And you need to find peace. Robert is waiting for you, Grandma. Not here, not in this house, but beyond. You need to let go of the guilt. You need to let go of the fear." As he spoke, the locket pulsed with a steady, comforting rhythm. The golden light emanating from it expanded, pushing back against the encroaching shadow. The swirling darkness began to thin, to dissipate, not with a violent burst, but with a gentle, fading sigh. The whispers softened, transforming from mournful pleas to faint, loving echoes. "My boy. Safe. Love." The oppressive cold lifted. The air grew lighter, cleaner. The grotesque shapes dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only the faint scent of old roses, Eleanor's favorite. The hallway was still dark, but it was the natural darkness of an old house, not the terrifying void of a tormented spirit. Jessica sagged against him, trembling. It's gone." Michael nodded, his own body shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. He looked at the locket. Its glow had subsided, but it felt warm in his hand, no longer cold. A sense of profound peace settled over him, replacing the dread that had gripped him for weeks. He looked at the door, now just an ordinary wooden door. He pushed it open. Outside, the morning sun streamed through the trees, painting the overgrown garden in hues of gold and green. The world felt real again, vibrant, alive. They stepped out of the house, leaving the creaking silence behind. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of dew and earth. Michael took a deep breath, the first truly free breath he'd taken in a long time. He never went back into the house. He couldn't. Not after everything. The house, with its memories and its tragic secrets, remained standing, a silent sentinel in the woods. He considered selling it, but something held him back. Perhaps now that Eleanor had found her peace, the house could simply exist, a quiet monument to a love that had become tragically misguided. Jessica stayed by his side, a silent support, a testament to the strength of their bond. The experience had changed them both, etched lessons onto their souls. They learned about the hidden depths of grief, the power of love, and the terrifying ways the past can reach out and shape the present. The Polaroid camera? He kept it. He put it in a box deep in his closet. He never used it again. He never saw another warning. But sometimes, late at night, a flicker of an image would pass through his mind. A fleeting shadow, a gentle reminder that some secrets, once unveiled, leave an indelible mark. He learned to trust his instincts, to listen to the whispers of the unseen, but also to understand that not all dangers are external, and not all protectors are benevolent. Sometimes the greatest challenges come from within, from the twisted manifestations of love and loss. Michael and Jessica built a life together, far from the old house. They cherished each other, understanding that life was precious and fragile, full of both beauty and unforeseen risks. And sometimes, when the wind rustled through the trees, or a shadow played tricks in the periphery of his vision, Michael would touch the locket, now always around his neck. It was no longer a cold harbinger of dread, but a warm symbol of remembrance, of understanding, and of a love that finally had found its peace. He had faced the darkness, not with a weapon, but with empathy, and in doing so, he had not only saved himself and Jessica, but had finally set his grandmother free. The warnings had stopped, not because the danger was gone, but because he had finally understood the message hidden within the fear: to live, to love, and to let go. And in that understanding, he found his own truth.